Welcome to the NGRAIN Producer Pro video tutorial about creating constraints for complex or interconnected part movements. If you want to constrain the movement of a part that moves along a nonlinear path or constrain the movements of interconnected parts, you can capture the movement in an animation and then use the animation as the basis to create a constraint. For example, if an animation has been created that shows how the pistons and crankshaft in an engine move, you can use this as the basis for a constraint. Anytime you enable this constraint, for example in exploration mode or during a task, your users will be able to interact with these parts to see how they move in relation to one another. To create an animated constraint, follow these 8 easy steps. 1. Make sure that the animation that you intend to use only includes keyframes that capture the movement on which you want to base the constraint. If it doesn't, copy these keyframes to a new animation and use this new animation as the basis for the constraint. If the keyframes contain callouts, shapes, or audio, you don't have to remove them. They won't be captured in the constraint. 2. Switch to model editing mode. 3. Select any part and then click the animated constraint button. 4. Select the configuration that contains the animation on which you want to base the constraint. You can use an animation in any configuration in the 3D knowledge object. 5. Select the animation. A list of moving parts in the animation appears. Click Next. 6. Confirm or edit the name for the constraint and then click Next. 7. Specify whether you want users to be able to move the parts past their starting positions in the first keyframe and their ending positions in the last keyframe when the constraint is enabled. 8. Click Finish. The constraint is created and is enabled by default. Test the constraint to make sure that it works as you expect. Only one constraint can be enabled on each part at a time, so if any other constraints are enabled on these parts, you must disable them first. To see a list of all of the constraints on a part, select the part and then click the List Constraints of Selected Parts button. To disable a constraint, right-click the constraint name and then click Disable. When only one constraint is enabled on each part, you can test the constraint. If you find that you need to edit the animation on which the constraint is based, we strongly recommend that you edit it before you use the constraint in any animations or tasks. If you edit the animation after the constraint is in use, the constraint may not work as expected. This concludes our overview of creating constraints for complex or interconnected part movements. For more information, see the NGRAIN Producer Pro Help and NGRAIN User Guide.